with this train spotting?
Question number 2, Right Honourable Winston Peters.
This question is to the Prime Minister and asks, does he stand by all his statements regarding New Zealand's free trade agreement with China? If so, why?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, yes, our free trade agreement with China has been a success for New Zealand, and our exports have more than tripled since the FTA entered into force in October 2008. In fact, New Zealand now has a trade surplus with China.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question, Right Honourable Winston Peters.
If unqualified, and to quote him, the FTA with China has been an enormous success, end of quotes, why has New Zealand's biggest company, Fonterra, performed so disastrously in China's supposedly growing dairy market, to the extent that Chinese companies have now got control over our high-value infant formula industry in just the last 6 years that he was Minister of Finance?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, that's really a matter for Fonterra and its shareholders. They're a private business. Their track record over time is that they've made decisions that create significant wealth for New Zealand. I'm sure there's examples the member can find where they've made decisions that didn't work. That's business.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question, Right Honourable Winston
If the
Peters.
trade imbalance since the FTA signing is $10 billion, and it is, in China's favour, why is the door to high-value chilled lamb exports only being opened after China has got control of New Zealand's largest meat exporter, Silver Ferns Farms, Taranaki Abattoir Company, Prime Range Meats, Oamaru Meats and Huttons?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, in the first instance, on the member's comment on trade balance doesn't take into account, I think, tourism, because taken as a whole, essentially we sell more to China than they sell to us. And secondly, the rural sector has waited many years for access of chilled meat to China because it's worth considerably more as a chilled product than a frozen product, and I would have thought the member would have welcomed the opportunity for businesses in the regions, including his own electorate, to get better prices for their product. And I can't understand why he's against that.
It's Chinese product. Supplementary question.
Order. Order.
How can New Zealanders...
Supplementary question, Right Honourable Winston
How
Peters.
can New Zealanders trust his government is not selling them out when Chinese media reports, such as the China Daily, report that National MP Dr Yang and the President of the National Party himself, Peter Goodfellow, are donkey deep in a new high-level Chinese business network?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, I would think that our members of parliament ought to spend some time with people who run businesses, create jobs and investment. That may be a strange, new and threatening idea to that member, but even the jobs in his own electorate will depend to some extent on the success with which businesses can export to China and other markets. And I suggest the member visit a few businesses and talk to some of the people who work in them and find out how the workers would like it if the business closed down and they didn't have jobs.
Supplementary. Order.
Supplementary.
Order. Supplementary question, Right
Why
Honourable
is the
Winston.
Prime Minister preaching to someone who lives in his electorate when he doesn't? And what degree of New Zealand? No, he doesn't. He's not called a double dipper for nothing.
Order. Member will resume his seat. Order. Now the member will rise. There's 2 supplementary questions he's ended in there. Half the trouble is the tone of the questions that are being asked, but I don't want to have to put up with more interjections coming from my right-hand side. If we can have a simple supplementary question and
Thank you, Mr.
standing
Speaker.
orders, I would be extremely grateful.
That's what's coming. Supplementary question.
Supplementary question, Right Honourable Winston.
What degree of naivety permeates the National Party mind which led to the Australian government getting a free trade deal with China far superior to ours And why are we therefore forced to be upgrading it?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, New Zealand's free trade deal was signed up in 2008 by the previous government with our support, because it was a good idea at the time, but it's turned out, despite that member's opposition, to be a very successful free trade deal, including any number of businesses in his own electorate that benefit from it. And I know he visits a lot of hospitality businesses, but he should try some export businesses.
Point of order, Speaker.
Order.
Point of order, Speaker.
Order. Point of order. Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Speaker, I seek leave to table a translation of the China Daily of March this year, 28th this year, about the donkey-deep nature of the National Party's involvement.
Order. On the basis that would not be freely available to members, I will put the leave. The House will decide. Leave is sought to table that. The member wants further explanation. I'll try. It's a Chinese newspaper article that has been translated, and it was dated March this year. Leave is sought to table it. Is there any objection? There is objection. Question. Order. Order. Question number 3.